Hello, everyone. I'm Greg Brown with Kimley Horn. I'm a consulting engineer working with the City of St. Paul on the Robert Street Reconstruction Project. And the purpose of this presentation is to help interpret the design options that the design team has come up with. And we're currently in the process of facilitating feedback from the public and from the property owners. And this presentation is complementary to the survey that you'll find online, as well as the map that's online that gets into more detail. So my intention with this talk is to introduce things to you and to kind of provide a bit of a roadmap and explain some of the concepts, but certainly invite you to do a deeper dive, if you will, with the engagement materials that you'll find online. The project team, in addition to myself, as I said, we're working for the City of St. Paul. Don Flaum and Anna Potter are the two primary city employees that are leading the project. We're working directly with them on the development of the concept, as well as the interaction with property owners and the public and the other stakeholders like Metro Transit and Ramsey County. Other key members of our design team that you might have met along the way through other engagement or other meetings that you might be party to, or Mike Anderson. He's our lead traffic analysis engineer, and Liz Wiggin is leading our community engagement process. So just a brief overview in case you're not familiar at all with the project. The Robert Street Reconstruction Project is a full reconstruction from Kellogg Boulevard to 11th Street, right through downtown St. Paul. And that means basically starting from building face to building face. We'll be removing the sidewalks, the curbs, the pavement, and reconstructing all of those elements. And in the process of that, updating underground utilities, both on the public side, which would be things like sanitary sewer and water main and storm sewer, and private utilities like Xcel Energy and Lumen and other communications entities. We'll take advantage of the situation or the project rather to update their facilities and improve access and capabilities within the downtown corridor. The City of St. Paul has developed 7 key project goals. We would like to create a vibrant and welcoming place for everyone. We want to look at all of the modes as far as function, that's pedestrians, transit, vehicles, trucks, etc. Street level commerce, whether it's commercial businesses or restaurants or all the entities that exist on Robert Street, we want to enhance how they can function with the street or how the street can serve them. We want to engage the community. This presentation is part of that. We want to make sure the community understands what the project can do for them, and we want to understand what issues the community may have, concerns, or things that would like to be improved through the course of the project. Transit is a big part of downtown St. Paul and Robert Street in particular. The project wants to support and enhance how that operates in the city. And a lot of our streets throughout not just St. Paul but other urban areas can be improved from the perspective of people with disabilities and accessibility challenges. So the project will certainly focus on improving both crossings and safety, as well as visibility of pedestrians and people moving about the corridor to improve general safety. And last but not least, Robert Street really has not been reconstructed in any meaningful way or holistic way for decades. So this is an important rationale for the project and something that will be incorporated kind of at its core. Everything will be replaced on the surface from a pavement perspective and sidewalk perspective, and underground facilities will be replaced as necessary to bring them up to date. So there are 4 city priorities that we'd like to highlight. Transit is one which I alluded to in the goals. The pedestrian experience, positive partnerships. We want this to be a collaborative process with the community and stakeholders and property owners. And climate resilience, which is an overall city goal that anything we do now with public works projects, we want to keep that in mind and incorporate into our design thinking. So just a brief synopsis of the existing conditions. The existing roadway is configured generally as 5 lanes, and it's true throughout most of the corridor. The center 3 lanes or center lane rather, is a turn lane. The next 2 lanes are northbound and southbound. And then the outside lanes are a combination of parking, loading, and driving lanes. Sometimes they're off-peak parking and on-peak driving, but they're kind of a combination of purposes. Beyond the curb, from the building to the curb, is typically about 13 feet throughout the corridor, and that's generally sidewalk, paved olive sidewalk. There are some landscaping enhancements throughout the corridor, but it's generally sidewalk area that's utilized in that space. That includes necessary functions like streetlights and signs and miscellaneous elements that you'll find in the urban environment. So this presentation wants to outline 3 general design options that we'd like to get feedback for on Robert Street. Those options are we'll be going over in a minute, but I want to bring up a couple points to consider as we move along through these options. This is very early. It's really our first exposure to the public of these 3 basic options. And things like lane widths are still in flux, exactly how the curb and gutter is designed, and traffic management details, including parking bays, pull out for transit stops, lengths of turn lanes, all those things are details that will kind of be fleshed out. The intent of this overview and this session of feedback is to really think about kind of the basic building blocks of the alternatives that we're going to talk about. And as we move forward and gravitate maybe towards 1 or 2 of these alternatives, we'll be looking at some of those finer points of lane widths and things to better finer tune the alternatives. So we've identified them as alternative A, B, and C. Alternative A includes 2 vehicle lanes and 2 bus lanes. Alternative B has 2 vehicle lanes with a center turn lane. And alternative C is really a hybrid of A and B. It's got the 2 vehicle lanes with a center turn lane, and then 1 bus lane, which we're depicting in the northbound direction. So the next series of slides is a series of cross sections and plan views, kind of block by block, of design option A. And I'll make a few highlights along the way, but I invite everyone to utilize the materials that are on the website to kind of look at more details from your perspective. If you're a building owner or resident that lives on the corridor, you might be more interested in the block from 10th to 11th and the southern blocks, and you'll be able to kind of zoom into that if you look at the online materials, and then you can certainly comment on those materials as well online. So we're going to work our way from north to south in all these options. So I mentioned option A is a 4-lane design. So the center 2 lanes, there's a northbound and a southbound traffic lane. The outside lanes are dedicated for bus traffic. They're also allowed for use as right turning for right turning vehicles. Then the space that's beyond those bus lanes is a combination of things. It could be used for pedestrian walks, sidewalks, which would certainly be one of the functions. It could be used for transit stops, shelter platforms. It could be used for green space, maybe the addition of trees, bike racks. Could be things like sidewalk cafes. There's already some of that currently between 9th and 10th along the Rossmore frontage. So it's a variety of uses. I bring that up in that what we do for these initial layouts is probably a little simplistic and general in nature, but in any given block, we could do different things in the space behind the traveled way. And some options might have a little bit more room, or some blocks might have a little bit more room than others on those. Parking and loading is another feature of those spaces that we would accommodate. And you'll see throughout these layouts some potential parking and loading areas that we've identified, playing off of existing uses that are in those locations. This first example, which is again, we're working our way north to south, 11th to 10th. It's got a lot of information on it. That's why I encourage everyone to use the website to kind of do a little bit more thorough look-see, but I want to highlight a few things that will be helpful as you navigate through these. The main roadway itself generally will have gray hatching for traffic lanes. It will have kind of the salmon color if there's a dedicated bus lane in an option. Transit platforms that we know will be incorporated in some shape or form, not necessarily as depicted here, but in these general locations are kind of the light blue color. Behind the curb, we have two general colors. We have kind of a cream color, which represents a clear walkway. That's a walkway that doesn't have lights or other impediments, trees, those kinds of things in it. The tan color represents that area that we call an amenity zone. And those are spaces that could be used for all kinds of things like lighting and bike racks and trees, green space, water quality features. So that's kind of undefined at this point, other than the fact that we've identified approximate spaces that can be used for it. The other thing I would point out here are these bars that are behind the corridor. They represent how the curbside use is currently being dedicated. So, for example, in this block, the red part of the bar represents no parking. The green represents parking meters. In this case, the number is the number of meters. So there's 5 spots. Then red again is no parking. You'll see along the way some of these are yellow, and those are included for loading zones. Those tend to either be not metered, but 15-minute or some kind of restricted time frame based on the signage adjacent to the roadway. The other element that I would point out, you'll see some icons, which just helps identify kind of the uses, whether it might be retail or housing. Many blocks have multiple uses adjacent to them. And we also have some of the property information, for example, the BP gas station here in the corner of 11th and Robert Street. So looking at this option A as it applies here, you'll see that we have the center 2 lanes depicted. We have the bus lanes on either side. And then at intersections, we've shown generally where crosswalks are. Something I would point out on this particular screen is the 10th Street Bikeway facility. So we have that depicted here on the south side of 10th Street. We also generally in the project would envision reconstructing a little bit into the side streets, in this case 10th Street. So you'll see some coloring going on in that on those side streets, and the exact extents of those will be determined as we go along. So now that I've got through a bit of the orientation, so to speak, we'll try to go a little bit faster along here, knowing that you can either come back to this recording or you can go to the website to kind of zoom in on details. So this is the next block, and we've generally made a cross section, what we call a typical section, 1 slice per block. Something I want to point out is any given block might have multiple typical sections, but for the purpose of trying to just give a general idea of what's going on, we chose 1 section to depict on each block. So here is the next block between 10th and 9th. The Rossmore building is on the right. Pedro Park is on the left. And you can see how the 4-lane concept fits there. This also depicts the potential to have a parking bay on the Rossmore side of the block in this case. That could also be something that's considered on the west side as well. It just happens to be depicted in this option. In the case of parking bay here, you can see the walking space gets a little bit constricted as compared to the other side of the road. So these are all kinds of trade-offs and comparisons that we'll be looking at with our partners, both stakeholders and budding property owners and the community at large. So there's a lot of interesting opportunities that the project presents to the community, and those are the things that we really want to get some feedback on during this stage of our engagement. So this is the plan view section of that block. You can see something I want to point out here too is this kind of deep blue hatching, and that's a potential parking bay or loading zone. In this case, it's just depicted as the same color, but it could be delineated however people may want. It could be smaller than this. It could be removed entirely and have more, which would present more space for sidewalk cafe, say in the Rossmore block or other uses. So those are things that are all in play relative to the size and scope and location. But we wanted to depict some of those to get feedback and get comments from people on what might be more important than other things. Again, I mentioned that here's a bar where the parking and the loading zone is. In the case of this block, the center of the block on the east has some loading zone short-term parking on it. We've also included parking on the side streets, so you get a sense of what might be happening in those locations. So working our way south, the next block between 9th and 7th includes the 4-lane section as before. Very similar kind of configuration on the sidewalk. Again, we've shown a parking bay on the east side to see how that might relate. And this is that section in plan view. Here's a little bit of the parking bay here depicted. Something that's occurring in this layout as we approach 7th Street is a widening of the roadway to account for a left turn lane. 7th and Robert is a very busy intersection. So this is an intersection where we feel that left turn lanes are going to be quite important to keep traffic functioning. But the left turn lane in both the north-south directions does add stress to the sidewalk and pedestrian environment. So you can kind of see how that cream color gets fairly narrow here. We have it somewhat consistent here, but the tan area gets a little bit narrower. So that's a trade-off that we need to understand a little bit more as we go forward on the 7th and Robert intersection. It's in this particular option, there generally aren't left turn lanes. So this is a case where things are a little bit different than the normal option A footprint. Continuing to work our way south, we have this is the left turn lane approaching 7th here depicted. So it's in effect a 5-lane section, and then the walkways and amenity zones depicted here on either side of the roadway. And this is that block in plan view. Now we're transitioning from the 5-lane down to kind of our standard option. The next block south, 7th Place to 6th Street. Again, fairly consistent on the main core layout, but depicting a parking bay on the east side. Something that's of interest in this block is the Securian properties on both east and west are a little bit more set back from the sidewalk area, the public sidewalk area, than other blocks. So it provides a little bit more spacious feel from a pedestrian's perspective than might have on blocks with the buildings that are right on the corner or right on the property line. You can see in plan view in this concept, we've got some parking identified on both sides of that block. The next block south, from 6th to 5th, has a bit of an interesting condition as well. There's some public space in the middle of the block that extends outside of the normal street corridor, and that's depicted in this cross section. We have 2 bus stops also shown in that area, and they kind of capitalize on that space. So again, that's that light blue hatch that we talked about early on. So this would be a stop identified for the G line, future G line transit. And this darker brown represents that space that's not in the roadway right of way proper, but is a space that could be utilized and currently is utilized for walking and pedestrian movements. So that occurs on both sides of the roadway, and that's where we've placed these stations to capitalize on that. The next block south, from 5th to 4th, is the Pioneer Endicott building and the First National Bank on either side. We've got parking bays shown here in conceptual form on each side. There is a need for that's been expressed along the way and does exist. Generally, it's a little bit more of loading zone focus in this block than parking, but it's something that we'll be working with those property owners and like to get feedback on in general from the community um, for the fourth and fifth block. Then we cross the light rail tracks and get to our last block, and that's Kellogg to Fourth. And this is a bit of an anomaly from the other blocks. You might, if you're noticing the right-of-way width at the bottom of the exhibits, this block has a 90-foot width. We generally have 75 feet in other blocks. But the other point I would make is beyond the 90 feet, both sides of the road, both on the federal side and the Kellogg Square side, have additional space that's kind of usable and currently used by the public as plaza or walkway or drop-off space, etc. So this block is quite spacious in comparison to the rest of the corridor. And it is another block that's been identified for transit stops. We have G-line platforms shown right at the Kellogg Boulevard intersection area. So that's the southern end of our project. As I mentioned, we go from Kellogg to 11th Street. And this is option A, which is at its core, 2 traffic lanes, a northbound and a southbound, and then 2 dedicated bus lanes. So we'll move now to option B, which is 2 vehicle lanes and a center turn lane and no dedicated transit lanes. So the first section here is kind of a transitional block from 11th to 10th. And we actually, in this particular block, don't have a center turn lane because of the one-way nature of 10th Street and 11th Street. But we'll be transitioning to that here in the next block. We have the Purple Line and G Line bus stations and bus stops depicted here. And I would note on this particular concept, generally at bus stops, we've shown the bus stops to be designed with bus pullouts. That's a topic that we're working and discussing with Metro Transit. It's kind of a non-typical design for a bus rapid transit. So it's something that will take more study to see if it's viable, but we did want to look at it to see how it fit from a spatial perspective. So this concept generally has those bus stations outside of that southbound and northbound travel way. So in plan view, you can see that we have the single northbound and southbound. We have that kind of narrow median that was depicted in the section, and we transition across 10th Street to the 3-lane core section that's defined by option B. So this next cross section is 10th to 9th in Rossmore on the right, Pedro Park on the left. You could see more of kind of the core section. And we have a parking bay here as well depicted on the Rossmore side. One of the things that you'll generally notice with option B is more space, more pedestrian space from the roadway proper to the right of way. So in this case, we have about 17 feet on the west side. In this particular scenario, we have 25 feet, which includes a parking bay, includes some amenity zone. What's depicted here is some chairs and tables for sidewalk cafe and a walkway adjacent to the Rossmore building. So in plan view, you can see the parking bay here in the dark blue. Parking bay shown here on the east side. It's Pedro Park. The salmon or cream color rather clear walkway, and then this kind of hatched area is something we just labeled here as potential sidewalk cafe, but it's a fairly broad space as compared to option A. And that would be somewhat typical as we look at and compare options, A, B, and C. Option B generally has more space from curb to building than the other options. Moving south, the next block from 9th to 7th, again, we have our core section, we have parking bays on the other side, and then our amenity zone and a clear walk space. An element that I'll point out on our exhibits includes this dark blue dashed lines in a few spots. It's a selected locations. Those represent things that we're aware of at this point, and we're still in the process of learning from property owners, but these represent areaways, and in this case, a heated sidewalk that are elements that would present more challenge from an engineering design perspective than others to work around or to build around. So we just wanted to flag those and have that depicted on these cross sections and plan views for kind of for background knowledge. Moving south, we are here at 7th Street to 7th Place. So one of the things that you'll see on the next layout is the development of a right turn lane. So just as option A, core had right turn lanes built into it through the bus lanes, but not left turn lanes. Option B has left turn lanes built into it, but not right turn lanes. So similarly, at 7th Street, because of the busy nature of 7th Street, we believe we need a right turn lane dedicated. So we've actually widened this design on the northbound approach to provide that right turn lane. That's what you saw in that section. We also have one of the bus stops here showing kind of utilizing that space as well. The next block down from 7th Place to 6th Street, the Securian block, and has the 3-lane section, and we have parking bays and a bus pullout identified in this block. So looking at that in plan view, looking southbound, we first have the bus pullout up here, and then south of that have some space that we've shown for parking and loading. In northbound have some parking and loading space. There's actually no parking in the current northbound side of the Securian block, but we just depicted some here to solicit some feedback, frankly, from the community and the property owners to see if that has merit or if there's maybe more of a preference to have green space or other uses along the frontage. The next block, similar to option A, we're capitalizing on the middle of that block with the public space that exists outside of the right of way. We have the bus stops for the G line depicted here. So in plan view, you can see in this case, there's a pullout to facilitate that those bus stops. And then outside of that, we have space that could be used potentially for green space or sidewalk cafe. It's a fairly wide expanse from the curb to the building outside of the middle of the block. The 5th to 4th Street block for option B includes the main 3-lane design. Now in this case, there is no turning at 5th or 4th, or no left turns rather. So there is either a stripe median, or this could even be a raised green median, but for the purposes of our discussion now, we just kind of kept things simple and just delineated space. So looking at that in plan view, we have some parking shown on the east side, some parking shown on the west side. Again, in this option, there's a fair amount of space between the curb and the building that could be used for multiple functions, including cafes or just additional green space, etc. That's depicted by these kind of light purple hatches. And as we go south of the tracks, we transition again to the Kellogg cross section. So this block, just like in option A, is a little bit different than the others. And we transition here. We do have our 2 transit stops at Kellogg. And we have our lanes, both a through left and a through right on southbound, and a single through northbound depicted in this option, along with some parking or drop-off space that could be allocated on either side. So that's the southern end of our option B layout. The third option is option C. As I mentioned, that's kind of a hybrid of A and B. So it's got a 3-lane traffic design, if you will, general purpose traffic design, and a single northbound bus lane design in this concept. That we could consider that bus lane to also be southbound, but we've depicted it in northbound for the purposes of this discussion. So in our first block, working from 11th Street south, you can see again the 2 purple line and G line platforms, very similar to option A. So a lot of things in option C are very similar to option A from a spatial perspective. The general curb dimension, curb to curb, is very similar. So a lot of the same benefits and same impacts or considerations can apply from A to C. This is the next block with option C, Cathedral Park and Rossmore. In Plan View, we have depicted some potential for parking on the east side. In Plan View, you see that here with the kind of the dark purple. We've also shown a little bit of that on the west side as well. Similar to option A, when we have the parking introduced, it reduces that through walk space. You can see how that cream color kind of tailors or narrows a little bit in those areas. The next block from 9th to 7th is similar again. We have kind of our core 3-lane with the bus lane. In Plan View, we have a little bit of parking here that we've depicted on the northern end of that block on the east side. Otherwise, it's fairly consistent with the section as depicted. And I mentioned earlier the scale and location size of any of the parking here depicted is all really preliminary and is intended to get feedback and comments. So the fact that we depicted it here doesn't mean that it has to be there. Just means it's an area that we identified that could work. But we may get feedback to say they'd like it better on this side or not at all. There might be some other uses for it. So that's just something always to kind of keep in your mind as you look at any of these concepts. The next section, working our way are south between Golden Rule and Metro Square, 7th Street to 7th Place. Roadway section is pretty consistent with the northbound bus and the 3-lane design. In this particular block, this is a scenario or depiction where we didn't have parking, so you can see there's more of the amenity space available, but some of that could be used for parking if that was a consideration or desire as well. But just wanted to show as many options and variations as possible to get people kind of thinking about the trade-offs and pros and cons of that space behind the curb. The next block is the Securian block. Again, we have the benefit of some of that open space feel adjacent to the corridor. We've included some parking, I think, in a similar fashion to option A. And this first pullout would be a bus pullout and local bus stop in this area. So very similar in a lot of ways to how the option A preliminary footprint is depicted. The next block from 6th to 5th again takes advantage of the public space that exists in the middle of the block to facilitate the needed G-line bus platforms. So in this case, the northbound bus stops in the bus lane. Southbound bus would stop in traffic here for the G-line stop. From 5th to 4th, that's the Pioneer Endicott, First National Bank block. Roadway section is, again, our consistent section. We've identified similarly as well, along with the other options, some space that could be used for parking or drop off on both sides of the roadway in this block. And, this median space, similar to my comment on option B, could be delineated as a raised median or green space or something, or just striped median like it is today. And working our way south to the last block from 4th Street to Kellogg. Again, kind of a transitional block, a little different than the others. We transitioned to 5 lanes here at Kellogg, where we have two throughs and a left turn going south, and then the bus coming north and a through lane coming north. Again, with some parking depicted on both sides, and then the G-line bus stops kind of gravitated towards the Kellogg Boulevard intersection. So that's option C at the tail end. So just again to synopsize the primary relationships between options A, B, and C. We put together just kind of some general uh, themes related to that. This is also depicted on the website in the survey, just to kind of help you remember what the differences are. So in design option A, it includes the slightly shorter vehicle travel time as compared to design option B, a little bit longer travel time than the existing condition. The transit travel time is shorter than the existing condition, as you might expect because of the travel lanes or dedicated transit lanes, and it's shorter than the other concepts. As depicted, and I mentioned, the parking and loading can change based on input and feedback we get, but as depicted in the options that you saw, there's about 30 fewer parking and loading spaces than currently existing corridor. And then this option generally has less space for pedestrian walkway and amenities, as depicted again when we're showing the parking bays and loading as we showed them. If those were to turn into pedestrian space, it'd be about comparable to existing. Design option B has a little longer travel time for vehicles compared to the other design options and the existing conditions. The northbound travel time is a little bit longer than existing conditions and other design options, but the southbound transit travel time is comparable to the conditions today. This option has about 20 fewer stalls, parking and loading spaces as depicted when compared to the current condition. But again, it's based on the draft concept that we've depicted here. And this has more pedestrian and walkway amenity space, quite significant as compared to both the existing condition and the other design concepts. It's a probably one of the biggest takeaways on option B. Option C, from a travel perspective, is a little shorter northbound travel time for vehicles than the other options, but it's a little longer southbound travel time compared to the other options in the existing conditions. From a transit perspective, it's a little shorter on the northbound, as you might expect with the dedicated transit lane. It's comparable on the southbound transit travel time to the existing condition. And similar to option A, as depicted, there's about 30 fewer parking and loading spaces than the existing condition. And again, similar to option A, it has a little less pedestrian walkway amenity space than the existing condition when considering the parking and loading that we've depicted. So if those spaces turned into pedestrian and amenity space, it would be pretty comparable to the existing. So that kind of gives hopefully in a nutshell, kind of a comparison between the three concepts or options that we walked through. As far as the project timeline, so we're relatively early in the life of this project. We're just at the beginning of the concept development and feedback. So we're hoping between now and early summer timeframe that we'll take these three concepts that we looked at today. We'll refine each of them in varying degrees and coalesce around a preferred concept. And that's coalition of the community at large and stakeholders, property owners, and agencies. We would like to have that happen in early summer. And then at that point, we will kind of transition into a more heavy engineering focus. And that's this part of the schedule here. And some utility work will actually start in 2024. And some of that actually will be starting in 2023. Utility work in a downtown environment really never ends, frankly. But utility work that's geared towards or related to Robert Street, getting ready for Robert Street, would begin in earnest later this spring and into the summer. And that's going to, the first entity will be Excel Energy doing some work there. So there is a public open house that all these options will be presented at, and members of the design team, including myself and the city, will be there to answer questions directly and get your feedback. We'll have large layouts and roll plots to kind of help zero in on things. And that's March 30th from 4 to 6:30. So we hope that as many of you as possible can see us there, and share your feedback. But we have multiple options on the website as well to do that. This contact information is Don Plum. Don is the overall city project manager for the project. So feel free to email or call him with any comments as well. And anything he can't answer, he'll share with the design team or other agencies as appropriate. And we'll do our best to get back to you on specific questions. So with that, appreciate your time with this presentation, and hopefully it was helpful, and look forward to seeing you at the open house on March 30th.